What happened when Khalid ibn al-Walid broke the laws of war with Banu Jadheemah? Written by Islam Civ. A controversial expedition took place after the conquest of Makkah, when Khalid ibn al-Walid was sent on a mission to Banu Jadheemah, to call them to Islam. When the Messenger of Allah was informed of the events that unfolded there, he became angry, raised his hands towards the sky, and said, "O Allah, I do indeed absolve myself of what Khalid did." 1. It should be kept in mind when analyzing this event, that Khalid was a new Muslim who had only converted to Islam a few months prior to the conquest of Makkah. It's also important to note that the companions are human beings who can sin and make mistakes, which is why their human struggles and how they overcame them make them an excellent example for us to follow. The Messenger of Allah said, "My companions are like stars, whichever of them you use as a guide, you will be rightly guided." 2. The Islamic State is not a utopia, and there is no doubt that incidents will occur in an Islamic society which are not in accordance with Sharia law. This has been true throughout Islamic history, starting with the first Islamic state established and ruled by the Prophet Muhammad. What is important is to have effective state mechanisms in place to deal with any grievances, al-Mazalim, that may occur, and provide adequate redress and compensation to the victims, so they feel they have received justice. In a future caliphate, the institution responsible for investigating and passing judgment on such matters is the Mazalim court. The principal qaida underpinning this court, i.e. redressing grievances, al-Mazalim, existed from the time of the Prophet, as we shall see shortly when discussing the Banu Jadheemah expedition. As a formal institution, jihaz, however, this wasn't introduced until the Abbasid Khilafah, and later the Seljuk and Mamluk sultanates, which housed the Mazalim court in a separate building called the Dar ul-Adl, House of Justice. Dr. As-Salabi narrates the events surrounding the expedition. The Messenger of Allah sent Khalid ibn al-Walid to the Banu Jadheemah tribe and instructed him to invite its people to Islam, not to fight. This mission took place in the month of Shawwal, in the year 8H, prior to the Hunayn expedition. Khalid had with him men from Banu Salim, Mudlij, the Ansar, and the Muhajirun. In total, his unit consisted of 350 men. When the people of Banu Jadheemah saw the approaching army, and more particularly, when they saw that Khalid was leading it, they took to their weapons. Khalid said, "Put down your weapons, for indeed, the people, i.e., the Quraysh and many others, have embraced Islam." One of the men of Banu Jadheemah, whose name was Jadar, stood up and said, "Woe upon you, O people of Banu Jadheemah, he is indeed Khalid. By Allah, the only thing that will follow our laying down of our weapons is imprisonment, and the only things that will follow that will be the striking of our necks. By Allah, I will never lay down my weapons." His people continued to try to calm him down until he was left with no choice but to lay down his weapons. Khalid then ordered for their hands to be tied behind their backs, combatants not women and children. This command having been carried out, he once again invited them to Islam. They did not properly say, "We have embraced Islam." Instead, they said, "We have changed our religion. We have changed our religion." Khalid began to kill some of them. Meanwhile, some of the Muslim soldiers objected vehemently to Khalid's actions. Khalid then placed each prisoner under the custody of one of his men. One day later, Khalid ordered for each Muslim to kill his prisoner. Some of the Muslims Banu Salim obeyed Khalid's order, others Muhajirin and Ansar, such as Abdullah ibn Umar, refused to carry out his order. The latter group, upon returning to the Messenger of Allah, informed him about what had happened. The Messenger of Allah became angry, raised his hands towards the sky, and said, "O Allah, I do indeed absolve myself of what Khalid did." An argument broke out between Khalid and Abdur Rahman ibn Auf regarding the topic of what was done to some of the tribesmen of Banu Jadheemah, and harsh words were spoken between the two. Abdur Rahman feared that Khalid was motivated by the desire to exact revenge on behalf of his uncle al-Faya ibn al-Mufira, who was killed by Jadheemah during the pre-Islamic days of ignorance. Perhaps this was the argument that was referred to in Sahih Muslim and other hadith compilations, in a narration which states the following: there was some tension between Khalid ibn al-Walid and Abdur Rahman ibn Auf, and as a result, Khalid swore at Abdur Rahman. The Messenger of Allah then said, "Do not curse anyone from my companions, for indeed, were one of you to spend the equivalent of Mount Uhud in gold, it would not be equal to the mud 2 handfuls of what one of them gives, nor half that amount." 3. The Messenger of Allah then sent Ali ibn Abi Talib to pay blood money compensation for the men of Banu Jadheemah who were killed. he gave even more than the normal amount in order to console the people of Banu Jadheemah for their dead relatives. 4. Dr. As-Salabi concludes, Khalid acted based on what he thought was right. He performed ijtihad, 5, which is to say that he tried to do what was right based on the knowledge that was available to him, and his ijtihad turned out to be wrong. When a qualified person performs ijtihad, he gets 2 rewards if he is correct, and 1 if he is wrong, and Khalid was qualified, since he was the appointed leader of the unit. That he performed a valid, albeit incorrect, ijtihad is proven by the fact that the Prophet did not punish him for his actions. 6. Although as mentioned, he compensated the victims' families, which is the well-known ruling for unlawful killing which doesn't reach the level of first-degree murder. 7. There is an important lesson to note from this incident, which is that obedience to those in authority 8 is not absolute because the Caliph, his ministers and commanders are not sovereign. Sovereignty, siyada, in an Islamic state is not to the ruler, or the state, but rather to the Sharia alone. Sheikh al-Masari says, the majority of Islamic thinkers from the scholars of usul, principles of jurisprudence, and others, have explicitly stated that the siyada is completely, absolutely and exclusively restricted to the Sharia alone. 9. It is the Sharia which underpins all the branches of government and their respective institutions, including the Caliph himself. While Halak says, whereas the modern state rules over and regulates its religious institutions, rendering them subservient to its legal will, the Sharia rules over and regulates, directly or through delegation, any and all secular institutions. If these institutions are secular or deal with the secular, they do so under the supervising and overarching moral will that is the Sharia. Therefore, any political form or political, or social or economic, institution is ultimately subordinate to the Sharia, including the executive and judicial powers. 10. This leads to the well-known Sharia maxim where the Prophet said, there is no obedience to anyone if it is disobedience to Allah. Verily, obedience is only in good conduct. 11. This is a fundamental principle in Islamic political thought, which prevents the rulers in an Islamic state from overstepping the limits of their executive power. Coupled with the Mausoleum court, these form powerful accountability mechanisms in a future state. Notes. 1. Sahih al-Bukhari 4339, web links. 2. Ibn Qudama, al-Mughni. 3. Sunan ibn Majah 161, web links. 4. Dr. Ali Muhammad al-Salabi, The Noble Life of the Prophet Muhammad, p.1716. 5. Ijtihad is where an Islamic legal expert mujtahid expends maximum effort in deriving a divine rule from the Quran and Sunnah and the sources they allude to, such as consensus imma of the companions and analogy qiyas. There are a multitude of other sources which may also play a role depending on which school of thought mazhab the mujtahid adheres to. 6. Dr. Ali Muhammad al-Salabi, op.cit, page .1717. 7. Even in first-degree murder the family can opt to accept compensation, blood money, rather than punish the murderer. 8. Holy Quran, Surah An-Nisa, Ayah 59. 9. Dr. Muhammad Abdullah al-Masari, Al-Hakimiyya wa Siyada ash-Shari, Committee for the Defense of Legitimate Rights, 1st edition, 1423 2002 CE. 10. YLB. Halak, The Impossible State, Islam, Politics, and Modernity's Moral Predicament, Columbia University Press, page .51. 11. Agreed upon. Sahih al-Bukhari 7257, web links, Sahih Muslim 1840, web links.